Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to our listeners, our viewers, wherever you are. Welcome to the GrowthAmped podcast series. We are joined today by Jacob Schoenberg of GrantX. GrantX is an AI-powered grant discovery management platform that helps organizations find value and track high-fit grant opportunities. So before we dive into our guest intros for our first-time listeners, the way these podcasts go is we start off with intros, and then we'll have our guests share their background, their company background, and talk about some industry trends that they're seeing. And then just some fun stuff like, hey, what keeps you up at night? And then a few more serious things like, what are your current challenges? What's going well? What's taking longer to kind of turn around? Uh, and then we'll open it up for any other discussions that organically show up. So welcome, Jacob. Please go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us about GrantX.
Thanks, Ian. I appreciate you for having me on the podcast and excited to share a little bit more about what we've built and what we're doing today.
Awesome. The pleasure is all mine, buddy. Tell us a little bit more about your story. How did you come to found GrantX, and just a little bit about your journey so far?
Yeah, absolutely. What we are kind of as a company is we're looking to basically build out the solution and infrastructure for a system that has been largely ignored, right? And this is the marketplace of about 1.7 trillion dollars of grant funding that moves through the US every year. And this is critical funding to support key research around cancer, heart disease, you name it, as well as support the efforts of nonprofits looking to combat homelessness, provide support services for victims of domestic abuse, as well as even infrastructure companies that are looking to adjust for the impacts of climate change and really kind of get the ball rolling on the energy transition. And really what we are is we go deep on the technical side. We have a lot of IP in order to really address these problems and provide true, thorough solutions to the pain points these people are experiencing every day so that they can focus on the work they're doing to change the world and stop having to spend so much time desperately searching for funding. And really where this kind of all starts is that moment of realizing how big this problem was. But I can kind of maybe rewind a little bit and take us there.
Sure.
Yeah. So originally I'm from Maine and grew up kind of running barefoot through the woods, and actually kind of grew up living on a sailboat for several years with my family as kind of nomads traveling around.
Okay.
And I think I had little out there, and I think it's funny, now that I'm based in SF and seeing how, maybe the kind of benefit of growing up in a network where you are a little bit more plugged in, the upside of that. Looking back, there was a lot of pros where the cons were maybe not having that network. The pros were having the experience of like getting trapped in a storm in the open ocean as a child, right? With my family on a boat, and learning that crisis management and like learning how to get through situations. And I think that's something that I've really drawn upon as being a founder.
What you're doing is a paradigm shift when it comes to how grant funding has traditionally evolved. With you putting a tech spin on it, making it more accessible, I think all of these factors are definitely something that our audience would love to hear about.
Absolutely. Yeah. When I had the idea for GrantX, I was working in corporate strategy and also doing some AI strategy in the Texas power sector. Largely working on how to address the system of problems related to climate change and the increase in extreme weather events. And so while I was doing this, I was doing a lot of like impact focused work. And one of my projects was set to help about 200,000 underserved families. We had green light from the executive team. We had some of the leading researchers in the US and the various specialties helping out, and everything was a go. And I was told, hey, great work. This is an awesome initiative. Just go get some grant funding over the weekend. Yeah. And that's when I realized it wasn't so easy. It ended up taking over a month, and it actually ended up killing the initiative as a whole. And that's when I kind of went back to our leadership team and said, hey, what the heck? We're a massive public company. Why are we not using the technology that I know is available to actually address these problems and make this something that's achievable? And when I looked around, I found out that there really wasn't anything out there that actually solved these issues, made it more achievable to go out and get this critical funding. And so I kind of double clicked, right? I spent about 8 months volunteering as a grant consultant myself to make sure I really understood the problem firsthand. And I spoke with people across sectors that had exposure to this market and were dependent on grants. And I just kept hearing the same stories. And I think kind of the key moment was when I spoke with Dr. Michael Sachs out of the University of Texas. He's recognized as a world authority in cardiovascular research. And one of the things that he said to me is, he's like, after all of the work that I've done in my career, I now spend 60% of my time dealing with grants. And after having to lecture as well, he said he only has 10% of his time remaining to work on that research that the funding is meant to support, fixing the human heart, right? And for me, that was this moment of, okay, this is achievable. What does the world look like if we can 6x the amount of time that Dr. Sachs spends, leading the effort to fix the human heart, right?
Mm-hmm.
What does the world look like if we can do that for every researcher, every nonprofit, and everybody out here looking to make a difference and seeking these grant funds in order to kind of do so? And that's really where GrantX came from. Built a team early, started launching betas, and are pretty obsessive still about gathering feedback, observing user sessions, and understanding, how do we improve, what products are needed, and how do we make sure that we're not just building things that are cool, but we're building things that truly solve these problems. That's what led us towards really diving deep into our tech. We've done some really cool stuff. One of the biggest issues in this space was, even though there's companies that have served as like databases that have been around for decades, none of them were complete. None of them really did a great job at giving you access to or visibility into what funding is out there and being able to kind of find that funding you need. So that was the first thing that we did, is we built a proprietary system for data ingestion that allowed us to actually go out and find all of these kind of missing pieces, right? And in a market where the data is very sparse and lacks a standardized format, it's very difficult to use. We were able to build a system that could actually go out and leverage this information. So now we can boast that we have the most data in the space, and we kind of are the window into the market. And then from there, we realized the next problem is, you mentioned AI powered, and it's funny. There's a lot of companies that will have AI powered, and we actually typically won't use that term because we've found that most often AI powered is more of a marketing tool than it is actual product. And we really lean heavy into making sure that our products are truly high value and truly high performance. And what we realized is standard LLMs just weren't able to solve this problem in this space, partially because of the complexity of the data. LLMs are ill fit just fundamentally. It's just not the right tool for the job. The other side of it was, when you think about writing an email, you want a creative writer. You're not worried if there's like a hallucination as much. You can just kind of correct it real quick, right?
Correct.
But when you are getting a hallucination and you are getting an output that's mostly like a creative writing, it's very warm temperature, and it's telling you what funding is out there, and it has an incomplete kind of data set, or it's even writing an application for you, those small mistakes can actually cost you critical funding that you need to support your operations for this year, next year, and beyond. And so we actually went out and built our system, which we call GRASP internally, and this is a kind of a key part of our IP and truly the foundation for everything that we build, which allows us to not only kind of switch from probabilistic to deterministic, meaning you can kind of reliably trust your results and have consistency there. But it also means that so the use case people will see the most with GrantX today is when they get on the platform, it's about discovering grants that are truly a good fit for you and finding the data and kind of being served the data about these funding opportunities. Even for that, matching somebody with a grant based on all the context that's available about your organization, who runs your organization, what registrations have you completed, what work do you do, what work have you done, where are you based, et cetera, taking all of that into account to match you with a funder or a funding opportunity. Our competitors, the other grant software solutions, average about 0.18 or 18% accuracy. Even the best kind of RAG systems, and using an LLM even, best in class that you find elsewhere is about 43%. And our system consistently achieves 93% plus in accuracy. And we did a little bit of like research studies, some small tests to see how does that compare to like a human consultant. And we see, and obviously there's more variance with humans involved, but even a human consultant that you would pay, $5,000 to $10,000, they would take 6 to 8 weeks to do the same activity. Oftentimes we'll only get about 80% accuracy, and we outperform that, but it takes 30 minutes and it's a $79 a month subscription.
That's pretty good bang for buck, if you ask me.
Yeah. I know that was a lot, but it is really cool stuff, and it is the key, infrastructure that allows us to actually address all of the problems in the system, and over time become the solution for this market. Something else that I kind of like as an aside is, we're out here trying to do good and make sure that we're understanding who the stakeholders are. And so, it's not just solving this problem, it's making sure that we don't create other problems. And so as part of the development of this system grasp, we also made sure that it actually has about 10% the environmental impact of a standard LLM. So not only is it much more powerful, it's much more efficient, and we're able to kind of have a really good impact while minimizing the negative impacts as well.
No doubt. As far as you talked a little bit about what you guys charge, what is your overall monetizing strategy with regards to those that are offering the grants and those that are seeking? If you can elaborate on that a little bit.
Absolutely. Yeah. Today we are a credit-based subscription model. So this means we have subscription tiers ranging from $79 a month all the way up to about $2,500, with most people hopping on at about $199 a month. But that credit-based system is something that's quite interesting. If people haven't heard of this before, you'll see a lot of tools using this. And I think this is also kind of another key signal on whether or not a company is truly moving towards like functionally agentic tooling rather than just using it as a marketing ploy. Is, basically with the subscription, you get a budget of credits. And those credits are consumed as you use more advanced functionalities. It allows power users to kind of use the platform as they'd like. It allows us to more effectively monetize power users, and it creates a natural ramp up your subscription tiers. That can be really quite favorable while allowing us to have a lower barrier of entry from a pricing perspective.
So that's really good to hear. I'm sure some of our listeners that are in that phase, or whether they're seeking grants or the ones that have got the funding and are looking to, find the best impactful place to use it, will definitely find value. So Jacob, you mentioned something during our last conversation about pricing tiers. If you want to elaborate on that a little bit for our listeners, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned, we have this kind of credit-based subscription pricing. It's great for us. It's great for our users getting onto the platform. But really what we're driving towards is something that's a little bit more aligned, right? And this is another key signal for companies that are truly doing new things in the world of tech, specifically AI and ML, is performance-based pricing, where we truly believe in the quality of our product, and we want to make sure that we're aligned with the performance of the product actually doing what you want it to do, right? And so what that means is as we continue to build out, we're working more and more towards expanding the offering of like win-based or performance-based pricing, meaning that rather than paying a subscription, it's actually basically we're paid based on the results that you receive from leveraging our platform. And that aligns us with the interests and incentives of our users and make sure that, we're really doing our job. I also think it makes more sense with the long-term goal of truly trying to be the infrastructure for this marketplace and for the grant funding system. That is not a state that we will exist in with subscription pricing as the only solution. That's definitely something where you'll see a transaction layer come in and it'll feel a little bit more like a Stripe, right? Or something like that.
So when you say results-based, you're actually talking about when a grant transaction becomes successful. Is that what you say when you talk about results?
Yeah. So it's kind of like you don't have to pay anything until you win type feeling.
Exactly. Okay. No, that definitely makes it a little more fair playing field for those that are in those beginning stages that are just trying to crawl before they walk and run. So, sure. Let's talk about what areas and common mistakes to avoid when seeking grant funding.
Yeah, absolutely. The general recommendation that I would have is try the platform, truly. You get the same benefit as if you were to hire a experienced grant researcher to go out for a month or two, learn about your organization, learn about what's out there, and give you just a clear kind of report on here are the funding opportunities you should go after. Here are the funders that you should be aware of and build relationships out with. Here's how you can build those relationships out and avenues for introduction. And then all of the data that you need around this funder and the grant opportunity to make a well-informed decision, as well as write a well-informed proposal. So from there, and it is quite easy. And I'll get into that. You basically just have to put in the name of your company or organization and your website URL. And then that's pretty much it. 30 minutes, you have a ping in your inbox and it says, hey, we've got everything you need. It's quite nice. I wish I had it back when I when I ran into the funding problem. But from there, I would say the kind of key things to know is, first of all, it depends on who you are. Like, I have a lot of founders come to me and ask how we got grant funding, because that's actually how we built the company initially. Is we bootstrapped off of grant funding that we won using our own platform. And startups, it's a little bit of a different profile. Like, you really want to look at, economic development and like local opportunities within like a specific city, maybe where you're from or where you're currently based, to see what they're doing to support startups and support early businesses. And those can be really great opportunities. It's similar to like an incubator or an accelerators type feeling, but through the state, right? There's also the SBIR and STTR programs out of several federal agencies that are focused on R&D. So if you're doing something that is truly, innovation, you're building something new, especially in the space of like hardware rather than software, this is great opportunities for funding. They typically come in 3 phases where you'll get an initial funding amount and then kind of comes in phases. I believe it usually caps out at about $2 to $3 million total. Pretty nice for an early startup. But in terms of just general approaches, I think it's important, as with anything, understand like, what does the competitive set look like? What does the field look like? If you are a startup and you're applying for a federal program, you need to understand that you are one of potentially thousands of applicants. And if you want to do that, you should absolutely find somebody to reach out to, maybe hop on a call with, or at the bare minimum, send an email to and say, hey, look, I want to apply to this. This is what I'm doing. Am I a good candidate? Can I ask you some questions? And it may save you some time. It also may put a face to a name when you're applying, which always helps. I typically recommend to actually lean away from federal funding, unless you're kind of in those spaces. If you're doing some crazy research in the hardware space, or let's face it, or in the defense space, you already have a partnership with a established university's lab, something like that, then yeah, go for it. Otherwise, definitely look into the world of private foundation funding. This is fantastic. I mean, people think about grants as a federal thing, but it's only a little bit over half. I think it's about 65% of funding that's out there. There's over $300 billion each year in the US that is distributed through state and local governments, through private foundations, through corporate foundations, you name it. And these are oftentimes much more niche, much less competitive, but still just as rewarding. If you do the work or use the platform, you can find a funder that may be specifically focusing on the problem that you're trying to address. And all it is an email away from someone who may give you recurring funding. And it may not be a 200-hour long application like you'd find in federal. And it may not be 1,000 other applicants. You may be one of only a dozen or two. And so I highly recommend that. I could talk about this all day, but I'll give just like a couple of other tips and tricks. Yeah, the big one beyond that research, and again, we handle that for you, so it's no problem. When it comes to applications, understanding that it's not just telling your story, right? You need to really do some time ahead of, to like take a look at who you are, your identity, like understand what are you representing, and understand how that story should be crafted to be best understood and how that meaning can be conveyed. But understand that it's not just narrative. Grants were narrative based maybe 10 years ago, but now that story needs to be backed up by data. Having the data to support what you're doing, having the data to clearly communicate, how are these dollars being turned into impact? How is that something that you've done before, measured it, and can go out, repeat it, and scale it? And having a little bit of rigor, being a little bit sophisticated there is key. And making sure that the budget that you're putting together for this proposal aligns with that story or tells that story as well. Not to mention is something that you will actually execute on, as you will need to have to report on a regular cadence that you are kind of spending money the way you said you would.
Perfect. I was actually going to ask you about the path to funding for people that are new, that are first timers. So I think you've pretty much touched upon a lot of those things. So a lot of folks that are getting started may not have a website or may not have something fancy where you guys can plug in and pull data off of and help them kind of craft their case. Is there any resources that folks that are in that boat can go to so they can be ready to plug into the GrantX system as step 2 to ultimately landing that funding match?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say that is a big thing that I probably the most often comment that I make when being asked how can we get funding is, where are you at, right? And oftentimes people are still just having an idea. They haven't put it on paper. They haven't registered as a nonprofit or as a corporation, depending on what you're doing. And my recommendation is always do those things first before you try and get money. No one in their right mind, whether it be investor or grant funder, is going to give you money if you're just saying, I've had this idea, but I haven't written anything down, right? Or I've written everything down, but I don't have a legal entity to take these funds into. Can you just put it in my personal bank account, right? No one's going to do that.
Right.
So you have to get your stuff together, right? And I think that when it makes sense, these AI tools like a ChatGPT, a Gemini, we use Claude a lot, are great for stuff like this, but should be used properly. You want to ask the questions to get guidance. You don't want to say, hey, do this for me all the time, right? And people can too often fall into that trap of, what you'll see like school kids do, where it's like, just write this paper for me, and then they just submit the output, right? That's not going to get you anywhere. But, and the analogy I use is it's like having a friend that knows everything. You can either learn from this friend and also know everything and be very capable, or you can just say, do everything for me. And then how does that really help you, right? And so I've worked with nonprofits where, my guidance was have a chat with Gemini for an hour, learn what steps you need to take, have it put into a document, you have an outline, you know where to go, you have the links, and then just go do that, right? And usually that does a good chunk of the problem solving.
Yeah. As far as grants go, what are the most common misconceptions? For example, a lot of people may think funding is only for nonprofit, or funding is only for things that are government initiatives, or they might have that block before they even consider it, right? You probably have a stat on how many founders don't even think about going to get funding outside of venture capitalists or seed capitalists, those type of organizations where, it could have been a lot more smoother, easier to do it with, uh, you know, based on qualification, of course, to go down the grant funding route instead of a commercial funding route. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah. Oftentimes people hear about grants and will say, oh yeah, free money would be great, and then don't really look into it because it's going to take them forever. And as a founder, I know very well how scarce your time is. One of the great things about GrantX, right? The other big one is that grants are still out there. People saw the news lines last year, and many ask me like, oh, is there still grant funding? There's about $1.7 trillion of grants each year in the US. Even with the policy changes last year, we only saw about a 15% reduction. So there's still a ton of funding out there. And we've actually seen a lot of that reduction in federal grants specifically, where these changes impacted the most, 15% reduction there. But we saw about a 10% increase in the private foundation space. And we're seeing a lot of those funds move to private foundations, or technically the funds move to state and local government grants, and then private foundations have stepped up to kind of fill in that gap. The market more or less is somewhat unchanged. There's still a lot of funding out there. It's just moved more towards these areas that, frankly, I would have already recommended pursuing and focusing on more.
Yeah, I don't think there's so many unknowns here, just because folks like us from the tech space have not even considered that. And we've either bootstrapped or we've found partners and investors that are active or passive or whatnot. So I think this definitely opens up a lot of great avenues for some of our audience. So what keeps you up?
I mean, realistically, probably like the 6 or 7 coffees I drink a day, if you couldn't tell by the pace of my speech. But no, I think, I mentioned earlier that we really focus on kind of being on that bleeding edge of tech, and we've done a great job of doing it. Not just our IP, but the tools we use internally. I've been stood up with OpenClaw. We use Claude quite effectively. Also, quick caveat there, if you do not have a team of brilliant, technically minded mathematicians, researchers, engineers like we do at GrantX, I would be cautious about using OpenClaw. We spent about 2 weeks really building out all of the proper OPSEC, skill switches, making sure that we're preventing open-ended skill files or open-ended and unconstrained system files. We're actually, using separate hardware for hosting these systems and making sure that we are managing permissions and accesses very, very rigorously. But if you do all of that, very powerful tools. That being said, we were also able to use Grasp to actually kind of superpower OpenClaw as well, which is kind of cool. But when you're doing this, right, when you're kind of breaking the ice ahead of everybody else, you have to solve problems for yourself a lot of the time. You don't have the luxury of being able to just kind of see what other people have done. One of the things that we really spend a lot of time working on, and we're quite good at kind of reinventing the wheel when there's no wheel yet, but one that we spent a lot of time working on lately is the interaction between an agentic solution and a human being, right? Many talk about how SaaS is dead or how agentic is killing software. But frankly, I don't fully disagree with it. I think future mid to long term, we'll see more of an agentic style interface with the internet. And the real question today is, what does that interface look like? What does it mean to work with an agent, right? You look at restaurants, right? Like most of the time, one of the biggest factors in people deciding not to return to a restaurant is bad service. And that's with another human being that, you're both kind of tuned throughout, a few minutes of evolution to have all of these subconscious kind of styles of communication and interaction. And it's all very intuitive. That doesn't exist if you're working with an agent. And there's much more room for a negative user experience when you're using this kind of almost like alien tool, right? And so we spend a lot of time looking at what is the optimal kind of way to connect humans with agents in a way where these agents are truly facilitating and doing this work for you, but in a way that feels natural, in a way that you can kind of intuitively flow through. Everything makes sense. Everything feels easy. And it can almost feel less like something's doing the work for you and more like you just have superpowers.
Yeah, very, very valid points as far as how AI is impacting us, and there's already so much becoming obsolete that what you learn today doesn't mean anything tomorrow. And as far as just the overall grant, you mentioned something about last year versus this year. If you were to put a percentage number on it, right? What percent of grants go unutilized or unclaimed?
You'll see on average about $1 billion. I think in 2023, the exact number was $990 million of grant funds go unused for various reasons. But I think the biggest thing here is that's actually kind of maybe not quite the perfect signal. It's not intuitive, but oftentimes because there's a lack of data, there's a lack of infrastructure, there's a lack of visibility and control. These funding decisions end up just kind of deferring to, okay, this is who we gave money to last year, or this is a very well-known entity. They're established, like, sure, whatever. They may be doing work that's only going to make incremental impact, but they're very low risk because we have that visibility. We know who they are. And that's one of the hopes that we're looking to really address is as we kind of provide that visibility, the control, and we really build out and modernize the infrastructure in this space, it will also then democratize access to this funding as these funders no longer kind of just defer to the big guys, right? They defer to the ones that are most deserving and the most capable of making a large and kind of reliable impact. That's a big one. Some grants are only for nonprofits. Some grants are only for profits. Some are for everyone. Some are only for like tribal communities, you name it.
So as far as, current challenges, talk to us a little bit about, what's currently working well for GrantX and what's been the most challenging aspect of scaling your solution and impacting such a critical financial market.
Something that's working really well. I mentioned, we have been very aggressive about adopting agentic tooling as a means of scaling our own productivity internally. One of the reasons why it's kind of an obvious one, right? You get to have the impact of more people without having to go out and try and spend the time searching for people, et cetera. For us, it's more about we have an unbelievable team. Truly, like everybody on our team within their own specializations is brilliantly talented. And the odds of being able to even go out and find one person that's the same, right, are very low, much less scaling a team of 10. So it makes more sense to give someone the productivity or the tooling that gives them the productivity and impact of 10 people, right? And so we really lean heavily into that. What's working well about that? I mean, we are off to the races. It is insane what we've been able to do. And the way that we've seen our kind of speed and efficiency compound and basically grow exponentially over the last year. It's amazing. But in terms of what's challenging there is you kind of have to, again, reinvent the wheel on designing an organization. Like we largely believe that Scrum as a project management approach is dead because frankly, it doesn't make sense with how fast we're building. And so it's like revisiting all of these things that are standard practice and looking at the first principles and understanding like, does it make sense for us to still do this? Based on the way we're moving as an organization, what is the best system? Are there like cross-functional comparisons, right? Like, do we stop looking at 1,000-person company as a framework or a blueprint for how we should start designing for scalability, and then start thinking about like, okay, maybe we stay small and just continue to exponentially improve productivity. At which point, like, does this look more like a pirate crew? Like, what's the comparison? So that's been really interesting. It's very fun. And again, just as like kind of a disclaimer, we have brilliant engineers on our team that are able to make sure we're keeping track of all of the security risks, making sure that we're able to address bugs and be aware of like what's a hallucination, what's not, and use these tools effectively. And if you don't have that, I highly recommend figuring that out.
Yes.
And that's kind of interesting. But if you're able to do it properly, it's unbelievable what you're able to do. And it's very cool too, because we're able to lean more into kind of like the human side of what we do on a day-to-day. Other challenges, I mean, in general, anytime you're doing something truly new, people struggle to understand what it is. And you have to really spend a lot of time communicating, what does this do for you? And that doesn't just go for our users, it goes for investors, it goes for everyone we work with. A lot of our users were used to just having a database and doing all of this research themselves, right? And so when they heard about GrantX, as we've become a bit of a hot topic, they're saying, okay, so you're like a database. You're like this other company that's a database. Whose database is better, right? And it's funny, oftentimes I'm kind of saying like, all right, let's pause there. Yes, we have a much better database, but we're not a database company. What we are is we are the replacement for all of that work you've had to do yourself or to hire a consultant to do for you. And frankly, we do it better than either of those options and in about 30 minutes rather than months, right? And so finding ways to make sure that you are telling your story and communicating what is your true value prop, how does this change your life? Because you are doing something that is paradigm shifting. And that's hard for people to wrap their heads around initially. That's been tricky. I think the other thing is, I mentioned earlier that grants are a forgotten market, right? This is about as unsexy gets. And it's something that people have kind of, someone hears grants and they're like, okay, yeah, sure, right? Because people have built up this muscle of like, grants are too complicated, right? Grants take too much time.
Right.
I'm not going to waste my time with it, right? People kind of have that reaction with it. We see a massive opportunity here. I mean, providing infrastructure to a $1.7 trillion company and taking a transaction fee of that is no joke.
Sure.
Not just what it does for us as a company, but what it does for this system of people who are looking to kind of get some work done and stop having to spend all their time and budget on getting the grant itself. And that has been another thing. And I guess maybe they're a little related in just understanding how to communicate the change you're making.
Yeah. So basically, your mission, if I was to put it in simple terms, is take the pain out of sourcing and finding the grant and let people spend more time in their subject matter areas doing the things that the grant is going to facilitate.
Yeah, absolutely. And
yeah.
I would say that's frankly part of it. We look at this system as all of its parts, and that is one side, right? And we're looking to make sure that we are addressing all of the really kind of, I mentioned modernizing earlier, but really upgrading the system as a whole. Because if you think about it, right, like you have a system of nodes, failure kind of cascades and compounds, right? And trends towards entropy and catastrophic failure, right? If you only fix half of it, doesn't solve the problem.
It only halves the failure rate, but not the
exactly. Yeah. And so we're really swinging big.
Well, on that note, let's talk about the future. Looking ahead 6 to 12 or even long term, where do you envision GrantX going and what are your key goals for the company's evolution and impact?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, 6 to 12 months. In the next month or so, we'll have the ability to map out the relationships between board members of all of these foundations that give out funding, making it basically it's like the whole 6 degrees to Kevin Bacon thing, but doing that with the people who make the decision on who gets the funding. Right? That can be a serious unlock for people getting on the platform, trying to find that budget. Maybe a month or two out, we have our writing tool in beta. And this is something when we first kind of launched, we had a writing tool. We took it down because we realized that just an LLM wrapper with maybe a little additional context wasn't going to cut it. You had to do something special. And now we've spent the last year really doing something quite special. And the infrastructure below our tooling, this grasp system, our ability to more effectively kind of manage and leverage data is going to allow us to bring something quite special when it comes to writing applications, particularly applications that are up to par, if not exceeding the traditional expectation for a human written application. And with similar time savings as to what we've done with grant research. And so that's something we're quite excited about.
So you're basically, the goal is to outperform the grant consultant that people are in today's market are paying to have them write the application and do a lot of that legwork, and it costs them time and money, even and so, to review and approve this.
Yeah, like we have our discovery, the grant research, it's automated. So you go through it once, and then you just get in your inbox what funding is out there for you. This is key for organizations like research universities, offices, et cetera. Oftentimes have standing teams going out and searching manually. And now it's automated in your inbox, right? And we look to take a similar approach all the way through so that in a few months, it'll be, I need grant funding, 30 minutes. I can see the grant funding that's out there for me. I find out autonomously what other opportunities come out there, and I can trust that these aren't just opportunities and funders that I'm eligible for. These are ones that are fit for me and I have a strategic advantage in applying to. It's worth the time. And then getting just about as close as we can to a button push application as possible. So that now it's a few minutes, maybe while you're going to get coffee, instead of 6 to 8 months, $10,000 plus. I mean, the organization I worked at actually hired a consulting firm to do a single application and paid them $100,000 and didn't win the grant, right? With GrantX, pretty soon, it'll just be a couple of clicks of a button in the amount of time it takes for you to go on a coffee run.
Yeah, fantastic. This is definitely very life-changing for those that are out there trying to, build the next best thing or find the next best, cure, if you will. You mentioned something earlier with regards to your LLMs and how those appliances are kind of segregated. Is it fair to say that a lot of you guys' compute happens more on confidential compute or on islands, essentially?
It depends, right? Like we use GCP, Google, for all of our kind of in-house built stuff, right? It's been great. For like using OpenClaw internally, all of that's isolated. Yeah. I would say that's a kind of general answer, but that should do it.
So, Jacob, I got a fun one for you. If you had a magic wand and you could change one thing in your business that is holding you back or slowing you down, what would that be?
I mean, the first things that popped in my head were time and money, but that's life, right?
Yes.
And especially we're doing a lot with time, with adopting these new tools. But I think if there was one thing that we could fix in this business, that's a good question. Yeah, I think I'm a little biased as I lead growth as my kind of day-to-day function. And for me, if I could wave a magic wand and have kind of anything happen, it would be that everyone knows about this, right? We've built something incredible and the people using us rave about it. And if I could wave a magic wand and all of the people out here that I spoke to when I first had the idea, right? The ones that are looking to kind of address cancer, heart disease, homelessness, nonprofits, research institutions, you name it, and have them just realize that we are here for you and there is a better solution today. That would be really great.
Well, I appreciate you making time over here and just sharing all you guys are doing at GrantX. I think it's phenomenal that you're transforming something that has been so stagnant in terms of methodology and laborious, right? Definitely going to be very valuable for our listeners and for those that are out there thinking of how they can fund the next thing that they're working on, and just generally awareness of grant funding that you've shared today is super helpful for all of them. So thank you so much for making the time and speaking with me today.
Yeah, absolutely. For those listening, if you're curious about grant funding, hop on GrantX. All it takes is the name of your organization and your website, and you get all the answers you've been looking for in your inbox. And you can just step away. It's like using a deep research, right? But just way more in depth. And if you're curious about learning more about GrantX as a company, feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn, Jacob Schoenberg. I'm always happy to talk with people in the market, answer questions, and hopefully get some more insights on how we can best serve our users.
Awesome.